So you didn't hit record?
Nope.
Oh, dude.
Because I was already recording, so I stopped it, and then I didn't hit start again.
Dude,
before
don't
we actually
worry.
hit
We
start.
recorded like a 90-minute episode, and at the end, we realized no one started recording, and it was tragic. So we caught it now.
Oh, no.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the GDFC podcast. Episode number 6, we'll be taking a look at list building and adapting to 9th edition. I'm your host, Brian Tabata, and we're joined here today by a very special guest, all the way from Australia, Dineeth Liyanagama.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I think one of the bright sides of the COVID pandemic has really been able to meet players from around the world, such as the Normal Blokes here from Australia. An excellent group of gamers and an excellent podcast. I do highly recommend checking them out.
Oh, 100%, Brian. And for those who don't speak Australian, Filthy Casuals pretty much translates one-to-one to Normal Bloke.
Thanks, man. I was going to say the same thing as we have, and we have pretty similar values. So it's really good that we're able to finally get on and record together.
Oh, absolutely. It's something we've been talking about for like several weeks now, so it's good to finally make it happen.
A couple of months even, yeah.
Spoiler alert, we have Brian Moy here on the show.
Goodness.
And we couldn't leave home without our resident orc, Dustin.
That's right. Choppa is shined up and ready to chop.
Yeah, I think a shiny Choppa is actually a less effective Choppa.
That's a good point. That's actually a great point.
Yeah. So, before we dive into the meat and potatoes of today's episode, I did want to ask our guests and ask you guys, what is your earliest or first 40k memory? Dineeth, can you kick stuff off for us? How did you get into the game? What do you remember about the game? Your early days.
So I think I must have been in like grade 6 or grade 7, and I was just at the library, and one of my friends was into 40k, and I was really into Lord of the Rings, and I saw the magazines and stuff, and he's like, "Bro, check this out, check Warhammer 40k out." And he showed me the web store with the Necrons and the Space Marines, and I was like, "Wow, this is so cool." And as a little kid, obviously couldn't afford it, so I didn't get into it until later after I'd finished my studies. But yeah, I reckon probably when I was about 10, 11 years old, it was just this surreal thing.
Well, very cool, coming around full circle with Necrons and Marines again for 9th edition.
That's it, yeah.
What about you, Brian?
Oh, I don't know if this is my earliest, but I can tell one of my most embarrassing ones. So I started playing in 2nd edition, but I think it was, 4th edition that I started playing a little bit of Chaos. So I got this sweet, sweet Karn the Betrayer model, and I loved it. Painted it, dipped it basically in chestnut oil. I loved it so much, I brought it to junior high to try to show it off, and I thought it was cool. Well, spoiler alert, nobody thought that Warhammer or tabletop miniatures was cool in 7th grade. So that quickly changed my mind. But then getting on the tabletop, I had a lot of Khorne Berserkers. My friend who got me into the game played Dark Angels and had a lot of land speeders. Suffice to say, I never made it into combat, I think in 3 or 4 games, and then I gave up on Berserkers.
That's why you turned to Eldar.
That is pretty much when I started committing fully to Eldar.
Now, what about you, Dustin? You got into the game in 8th, so your memory is a little bit more recent, I think, than some of ours.
Yeah, that's right. I got into 8th with 4 other guys, and my fondest memory was one of my first memories. We had no table, we had no terrain, so we measured off a 6-foot by 4-foot area on the floor of my attic gaming space, and we played on the laminate flooring with books and like pieces of like scrap from my house repair materials, and it was awesome. It was so much fun. We did that a couple of times, and we were hooked and threw together the cash to buy a nice table and play off of there. But I still have that tape to this day stuck to the bottom of my floor because it always gives me a smile when I think about that time.
Is it that or just being lazy? I know for me, that's what it would be.
my wife gives me a hard time all the time. She's like, peel that off. I'm like, no, it's too important.
Well, my first memory was actually an Eldar memory because I was over at my friend's house and he's like, "Hey, you like this game StarCraft? Well, here's like the game that actually, inspired a lot of StarCraft. And he showed me these like little bug guys. I was like, well, what are those things? Like, oh, these are like termagants. And I was like, oh, they're kind of cool. And he showed me this other squad painted in black and green. I was like, oh, what are those? And he's like, oh, those are Dire Avengers. So like, what are these? They must be the greatest thing ever. And we just kind of squared them off on the table. And then he just kind of like showed me how the game worked. And I just remember picking up like that handful of dice for all that shuriken fire. And I was like, the memory of just like holding all those dice and rolling all those dice was such a visceral feeling that's definitely what got me hooked. And it's like, man, I love playing this game. But I think I was in the same boat. I was like, oh, what? How much do these guys cost?
Hey, you guys do not live in Australia. It's even worse over here.
Oh, I cannot imagine. And here we are, some 20-some, if not, well, actually more than that, probably years later, bringing us all the way from that was the 3rd edition memory, all the way to 9th edition. And we do have some pretty big changes to the game. Because everything starts with the missions, we wanted to look at the missions, look at the primary, the secondary, and take a sort of bird's eye view, a top-down look of how are we going to approach these missions? What are some of the things that your armies needs to be successful? And later on, we can look at maybe some specific examples and maybe some ideas that we have for list building ourselves. Because as of this week as well, the points and changes for Chapter Approved have been released, causing quite a stir in the community. So first up, today we're really just going to kind of focus on, the 2,000-point Strike Force missions for Eternal War. Pretty much all the missions have the same primary. You start scoring your objectives in your turn, starting from battle round 2. They're structured the same way, where you get 5 points for holding an objective, 5 points for holding 2 or more objectives, and then 5 points for holding more than your opponent, capping at 15 per round, as well as 45 points total for the entire game. One little caveat, Mission 6 is slightly different, where you can, if you hold 2 and hold 3 respectively, that's how you unlock the 5 points and then 10 points. So a big change, a big departure from a lot of the, hold more, kill more, a lot of us have been used to in the ITC. So Brian, we have talked a little bit about this. What were your sort of initial impressions of the primary? What did you like thinking about them?
There's a lot here, Brian. I think for me as an Eldar player, as a Grey Knights player, I'm so used to wanting to go second and just killing somebody and very sneakily taking a point by just getting something on there. And I can't do that anymore because I have to hold that objective until my next command phase, right? So there's this idea that you have to design your armies to be able to, 1, get onto the objective, and 2, stay alive on it. So I think that we're going to see a lot of layering. What does that mean? Troops and maybe a character inside a transport that are holding objectives, so that if the transport gets popped, the troops can come out just behind that as well as a character. And then if somebody takes out the character or the troops, you still have a character holding it. So you're going to have to figure out, how am I going to be able to just hold? And you're really going to want to hold 2 objectives minimum in order to try to cap out on your primary objectives. So I think that's going to be a big deviation for many that are used to ITC play.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. Armies I've gotten used to playing and things like Deathwatch that like to hide for not going to lie, probably 5 of the 6 turns, and then pick one turn that they come out and play and get objectives and like to play reactively. And that's totally different. That kind of I really struggle not holding multiple objectives, fairly focused for the whole game. So it's going to be totally different.
Yeah, that's a good point, Dineeth, because just the way that you score points now, conservative play that a lot of ITC players use is going to find you losing games now that you're used to winning. You're going to be losing some games by 1 or 2 points. You really have to be a little bit more aggressive and know exactly when you need to commit to the board, and that's probably going to be no later than turn 2, right?
Yeah. Because let's be honest, it's a 4 to 3 turn game. That turn 5, there's not a whole lot going on. In turn 1, you can't score. So if you're not making big moves in turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, you're not going to win.
Yeah, and in the situation in ITC, you were just holding one. Your opponent was holding 1, maybe getting a hold more. Differential wasn't. Now if you're getting 5, getting 15, the differential really starts to blow out really quickly.
Yeah, I think the definition of conservative play will change a little bit. It's not just, as you said, holding 1 and hiding. I know the primary is essentially the same thing that we saw in the Adepticon missions, and I know a lot of my test games there. For me, it was very easy to overextend early and trying to hold these because you want to hold more, you want to get out there, but you're so vulnerable in doing so that, especially as a little bit more of an elite army, you know, I was playing Space Marines, you can't get too greedy too early. You need to, I think, Brian, you hit the nail on the head. I think you want to aim to be able to hold 2 and hold them reliably. If you start stretching out for 3, you very quickly, I think, sometimes find yourself getting shot off at 2 of them and then only holding 1.
And so far, I've gotten about 5 games. I'm hopefully getting game number 6 in this weekend in 9th edition. What I found is, in my turn 1, I want to make sure that I'm at least holding 1. If I can hold 2, that's great. But more importantly, if I can somehow bait my opponent in that first turn to overextend by maybe 1, I can shoot them off pretty reliably in my turn 2. So trying to find a way to deny them their holds and getting ahead, I guess, quote unquote, on the kills by taking out an important aspect of their army. That's kind of the new definition of conservative play for me, at least in these 5 test games so far.
I do want to touch on, you said, you know, mobility is definitely very important on getting to these points, especially for some of the missions where, you know, the points are a little bit more in the different quadrants. You know, Space Wolves, Space Marines, we're not really known for speed, but I think there's other ways to sort of achieve this where I've been starting to lean a little bit more on infiltrators and things like Deep Strike to find ways onto those points as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add, you know, most of these points aren't deep in a deployment zone. They're really central. So you can't really, you know, sit in your deployment and have good presence over these points. And it'll be a big scrap and a big fight for who gets that position.
Big scraps in the center. I love it.
Now, one interesting thing is, I think there's interesting temptation to try and rely a little bit on deep strikers, but the smaller board makes it a little bit riskier too, because you can also get zoned out. Is that something you have thought about, Dustin, you know, particularly for orcs who rely very heavily on the jump and moving their units around that way?
Yeah, it's certainly something to think about. And a big part of it's going to be how the terrain is arrayed. Before in 9th edition, with the size of the board, foot slogging across is just wasn't feasible. But with objectives being placed where they're at, the board size being smaller, and as y'all said, that desire to have that scrap in the center of the board, and there's even secondaries that award you to do that. You know, foot slogging might be a possibility. The jump is not going to be a given every single time. Using the teleporter is not always going to be a given every time, which is probably good because orcs really don't have the points like they used to put a bunch of things in Deep Strike. But what I think is going to define at least this early stage of the edition, in terms of how my list is built and how other people's list is built, is you need to have speed and you need to have resiliency to get to the point and then stay on the point. But for every single faction, speed and resiliency are going to be defined in different ways, right? So some factions will have units that are legitimately fast. They can just move across the board, go 14, 20 inches, whatever it might be. There will be some units like, you know, the new Blade Guard guys that could just sit on a point and never die. But there's others that use Deep Strike. There's others that use a big giant horde that can't be moved. There's different ways to define speed and resiliency, and I encourage people to think about that a lot when they're approaching their lists.
That's a really good point, Dustin, because a lot of these objectives are, 8 to 12 inches minimum away from your deployment zone, and not everybody's going to want to deploy right on the line now that you're in that you deploy, I deploy sort of mechanic again. So to your point, I mean, in one of my Eldari armies that I used to run, which was Covenant Harlequins, every one of my rack squads now has an Ossa factor, because now you can move 7, you can advance and then fire and fade, which reliably gets you, probably 14, 16 inches of movement to try to get onto those objectives. And some of my other armies, like my Eldari armies, Wave Serpents, can have a Wave Serpent with a troop and a character in it. I can go move onto the objective, maybe with 2 Wave Serpents, block it off, and I know pretty reliably, even if they take 1 down, I'll still be able to control that one objective with, deploying the troops out of it or even the character behind. So those are very important aspects that we're going to have to think about from a gameplay perspective.
Yeah, 100%. And, that point that Dustin said before of different armies will have different factors that will, quantify their resiliency and their mobility and movement. And that's true. Like, a lot of armies will rely on things like the Harlequins, for example, invulnerable saves, neg 1 to wound. You've got Death Guard armies that literally can't be shifted because of stat saves and feel no pain. You got drone mechanics and things like that. So it'll put a lot of pressure on players to find these archetypes that they'll predict that people can't deal with. Like the classic one was Tau. Like, people were not ready to deal with 40 to 50 shield drones. So our players had a field day. We're going to find people who can, and like you said, Brian, with Fire and Fade, it just adds such a different dynamic to a little 5-man or 6-man rack unit that previously couldn't do anything. Stuff like that is what people will find and will be strong. So I'm really excited to see what comes up out of that.
Transports, like you said, are definitely a solution. I'm sort of looking at, the Impulsor, of course, went up, but I think it still serves a valuable role. And, if you sit a transport on a point, even if you do destroy it, the objective secured, troops can hop out and grab the point. And there's still incredible value in that thing being able to move 14 inches, have the troops inside get out, move 9 inches, potentially advancing as well to basically toe in on an objective and steal it from you. I think you should also be considering any type of tricks to prevent your guys from getting targeted. So like shrouding is a big important one. Cloudifies, again, for Death Guard is very, very strong too, and finding sort of that durability.
Stuff like that is huge now. Absolutely.
Game-winning strategies for sure. I mean, I feel like in my Eldari armies, I'm turning back the clock to 2014 with Wave Serpent spam with experts and masters, because that's going to be effective, I think, for a lot of Eldari armies to be able to, one, have a durable platform to get onto these objectives, but also be able to have some output as well. It'll be fun.
Another big important piece of the puzzle is you need something to go and take the opponent's objectives. If you really want to start maxing and doing well in the primary, you're going to be needing that hold more. And the most economical way to do that is to kick someone off of their objective with an assault unit, because it's a 2-for-1 trade where they lose one and then you're essentially gaining one at the same time.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that, Brian, because I think a lot of people think this is going to be a very shooty addition, but to your exact point, that economy of action that exists with those combat armies, I think can't be understated. I think that's a very important thing that people will want to make sure they have some sort of answer or that tool in their armies.
For me personally, there's a little bit more of a shift towards a more balanced force, I think, for everyone, because even really shooty armies are going to need something to go out and seize objective. But even me, near the tail end of 8th, I was playing a very heavy melee army. I'm also going to need to shift a little bit to shooting. And here's why. Because, like I said, melee combat is probably one of the most efficient actions you can take in the game, because you're removing an objective from an opponent and you're gaining one for yourself. However, the resources you have to commit to do that, you're limited to be one spot at one time. You have to commit more to be able to do that. Shooting someone off an objective is much simpler and easier to carry out, but less rewarding. I think ultimately you have to have a mix of the two, not necessarily a 50-50 split, but I think you're going to need a balance. And I know I've been personally looking here to bring a little bit more shooting in my Space Wolf list, because I kind of want the ability to remove someone off at least one objective per turn as well.
A few of our local guys were talking about, having the prediction that this edition is going to be full of these big bully units. Like if you imagine like a big unit like Alaris Custodians or Blight Lord Terminators, or even things like Bulgrin, units that are more or less resilient to most shooting and have a threat range of that kind of 10, 12 inches where you don't want to be anywhere near that. And if those units start, taking the center of the board and really pushing opponents off their own home field objectives, people are going to have to find a way to do that.
Oh, just because you mentioned Bulgrin, Dineeth, and if you caught our battle report on the YouTube channel, we mentioned Brandon Grant. We had a quick opportunity to talk with Brandon. He also agrees that Bulgrin are going to be a very key unit for these guard armies.
Oh, I just picked some up the other day, mate. I'm excited.
But I think, there's going to be two archetypes that I can imagine, or at least play styles. One is from a win perspective, right? Like, do I want to sit on my 2 and just be able to blast my opponent off of 1 every turn reliably? So maybe I'm not going out taking that 3rd all the time, but I'm going to win pretty methodically by just holding my 2 for 4 turns. Or then you're also going to get to that point, Brian, like, do I need to make sure that I have that capability to be able to go out and grab one and take over an objective when I need to? So I think there's going to be different types of army builds that we're going to see in 9th edition. I'm excited for that. It's going to be a brand new meta. My one fear is these missions do seem to steer towards a certain type of build. Like you said, you're going to have these bully hammer units in the middle, some durable stuff holding objectives. My one fear is that I don't want to see the exact same list designs just with different factions. I think that leads to kind of boring play of 40k.
100%. Yep.
Yeah, I think if you sit and just plan to shoot an opponent off, I think it's very, very hard to get hold more in that case. To expand
on that, like some armies can't even do that. Like if you look at an army like let's say Craftworld Eldar really have like a brick unit aside from Wraithguard that die to a stiff breeze that can actually do that. Not really.
Oh, Dineeth, I've been tinkering with Wraith this whole past week. I have in the lab, so I'm thinking. I'm sad that you can't use specialist attachments in the new
I know. I was going to say
because I had this idea of expert crafters and hunters of ancient relics. So the Wraith Blade get 2 attacks, 3 on the charge, 4 if they're on a relic through within 3 inches of an objective, and then 5 with that specialist attachment. And boy, I just had this idea that these toughness 6, strength 7 with the axe, Wraith Blades, 4+ save, 3+ with protect can really rue the day. But I'm still tinkering with it. I'm hoping to get a practice game in with that sometime in the near future.
Yeah, for those...
Do they have the infantry keyword? They do, right?
They do, yes. And for those that don't know, the GT missions have been more or less leaked at this point, and part of the hubbub over around is that specialist attachments are found to not be allowed in them. So, the hits to my Reavers and Stalker Pack keep on coming.
Poor Gene's mate. poor Gene's.
Rest in peace, shock attack gun for the orcs too.
Yeah, that's it. That Roxor is going to sit on the shelf for a while.
Yeah. On a side note, I wouldn't be surprised to see those relics folded into the 9th edition codexes, just like the Marine stuff was in all the supplements. So
yeah, that's it.
I think some of those things will see a return, but
stay on the positive side, right? Like, I know some have said that some of the Vigilus stuff has felt almost like a failed experiment. I know, or at least in my heart of hearts, I had this feeling that GW has some wonderful new ideas on how they want to roll some of this stuff up into codex books. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, what do you think detachment abilities are? They're not just a way to get CP back. For your warlord detachment. So, I mean, I'm guarantee you we'll see special detachments in codexes for different armies.
Heard it here, folks. Or heard it here first, folks. If that doesn't happen, we'll hold you accountable to that, Brian.
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of it. I didn't say when, so 10 years from now, it could still happen. So, where do you find the balance? Do you think it's mandatory to have an assaulting unit? Are you looking for stuff like that in your armies?
I think it's silly to have a way to deal with an opposing assault unit, and 9 out of 10, most people will gravitate towards an assault unit anyway to deal with that. Like, no one's going to charge into no one's going to charge into like a bunch of Chaos Dreadnoughts if there's 20 Khorne Berserkers sitting in a ruin next to them.
Challenge accepted, Dineeth.
Yeah. So, most people deal with that by having a counter assault unit anyway. So, look, I think I'd like to build lists that have assault and ability potential. Like my first iteration of that, and me and Brian have talked about this, was trying out what I could do with those death knights. And it was pretty cool towards the end of 8th with, being able to drop at 6 and charge in and just kill everything.
Mm-hmm.
But having a unit that can really push forward onto an objective, kill, and wrapping's not really dead if you can get 2 units. Like, it's still going to get stuck in there. It's they're hitting something hard, taking your opponent off the objective, so they can't score that primary for a turn. And there's only 4 scoring turns, so 25% of their scoring the bin the second you commit to pushing on even getting off. So that's no joke. So, and the easiest way, like you said, not shooting them off there, it's getting into combat action. So look, I'm definitely building towards that kind of thing. I'm building towards having units that can do that. Whether I go with one key unit to do it, or most of my army able to do it anyway, it'll depend what the meta's like. What's favored in the missions. Do we need to have a focus on backfield and having shooting, or focus on shooting to the middle of the board? I guess those are the questions that'll dictate what we end up playing and what I end up playing.
I think I would encourage you to look for something to put in your list that you can move forward with confidence and seize ground with, because it just opens up so much tactical possibilities for your army, and it really makes you comfortable playing these styles of missions if you have something in your list that can do that.
Justin, one thing I was going to ask you about this, because you still want to try to make hordes work, right? Like, people are singing the swan song of hordes with the new blast, but I feel like the morale rules with OBSEC and combat being able to take objectives, there's still some play there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think hordes are dead at all. And I think the battle report that we just filmed is a good testament to that. Looking at the highest level of play, I think it's going to be a necessity to have a unit or multiple units in your list that can be aggressive and take those points and score aggressively. It's not enough to win a game just by shooting your opposing play partner off of points and having a low point win. In big tournaments, it's not enough to go 6-0. You need to go 6-0 with very, very high scores. And you're not going to be able to achieve that unless you have those sort of units that are able to push aggressively, score very aggressively, and try and get that max point differential, because that's just how pairings work. So I think you'll see that pop up in the highest tier play for sure. As for where hordes go there, it's I definitely would not be singing a dirge for them. I think they're still very much here. I think they're going to have a really powerful play. I spoke earlier about resiliency and speed, and hordes have both of those in spades. But yeah, there's still a lot of things that got to shake out till we can make the final judgment.
I think people are underrating the new morale for hordes as well. It's actually a lot harder removing 30 boys from a point than you would actually consider. Because before you're like, oh, I killed 20 of them, they're gone. No problem.
Oh, remind me.
So I wonder if it might be a little bit of an interesting cat and mouse with the meta, because if things like custodies start becoming a problem, or elite troops become a problem, the guns that people start bringing start becoming more anti-elite. And then suddenly someone shows up with 150 termagants, and you're just going to be in trouble. We saw something very similar too with infiltrators. Everyone's like, oh, Deep Strike is dead. So no one brought Deep Strike, but guess what? No one brought infiltrators either. So people might be like, oh, blast kills horde, but the points are a bit higher for blast weapons. People might just end up leaving it at home because they think, oh, everyone's just going to bring 5-man units anyway.
And that's exactly right. I think certain armies, like orc boys, I definitely don't think are dead. There's still so much potential with a big unit of orc boys running.
And their points increase literally wasn't that bad at all.
Yeah, exactly, man. And something like Plague Bearers, I actually haven't seen their points or points change, but you're not able to deal with that. You're actually packing just bulk bolt guns, or bulk, shuriken. So and they're passively just sitting at the max, neg 1 to hit. They're fearless, and they're not fearless, but then spawning new dudes when you roll on. I think it is like that. That is going to be huge. It's going to gap. So, hordes definitely aren't dead. Good that other people are realizing that, because if we all gravitate towards anti-elite kind of shooting and that, all it takes is one player to take a massive horde of something, like you said, termagants guys, to just win.
What you're saying, Dineeth, is foot spam Eldari toughness 3 bodies for the win.
What I'm saying is just 50 10-man Scion units that die to a stiff breeze.
Trades for days.
Yeah, it's just an army of 50 pawns, mate.
Yeah.
What's interesting, though, I think about is when I'm thinking about list building right now, it's how do I win on the primary and how do I negate, because these secondaries are hard to max out. And if I have a list that can pretty reliably score relatively high on like 1 or 2 of the secondaries, but more importantly, deny a lot of secondaries to my opponent, I think you're in a really good position to at least win games. You may not be generating that super high score differential like Dustin was talking about, but for me, just to be able to win and give myself that fighting chance for all these games, I think that's going to be key for us. So I don't know what your thoughts are on the secondaries, but as I look at them, like it's probably more important almost to deny than to build to max.
Yeah, like the biggest thing is not giving your opponent free points, because it's so hard to get those points in this new format. Like you don't want to throw them a bone and just give them a 15 because you brought 6 vehicles that are super easy to kill. Like it's just not worth it, because the games that we've seen being played, even the big blowouts where someone's really lost hard, their opponent's only scoring like 70 to 75 points. Like that's a big win in our eyes. I don't think many people will get close to that 90 unless it's a super dominant. So you throw your opponent 15 points or even 10 points from a secondary, that could be a huge swing of the game. So I think building lists that don't give up much on the secondary is important, and also on the primary, building those lists that can, because it's not really like in ITC where you can just get a 1 point for hold more and just accrue that. Like you accrue your holding an objective, but the swing can be so big when you're reaching out for that third objective or you're pushing them off that second objective that you want to play that army so niggly and annoying. It's going to be that irritating army to play against, because you can do that, really dominate and really win. Because you you want that. Yeah, you want your opponent to actively do things and actively make mistakes.
Yeah, those are great points, Dineeth. I know I've been really struggling, I think, building my Eldari list, but I had a little bit of inspiration yesterday and the day before where I was thinking, all I really want to focus is on, can I hold 2 and deny my opponent the ability to hold 2? If I have enough firepower and durability to hold 2 and deny my opponent the second, that's probably a pretty decent list to at least start with. And then if I can figure out ways that allow me to capitalize on as many secondaries, but more importantly, deny secondaries to my opponent, that's going to at least help me win games. I haven't gotten anything till like the 70s to this point, like 60s, high 60s, but I think that's at least the way that I've started to think about the game.
Yeah, I think like a big winning score is like 60 and above, I'm seeing. So
the biggest point differential I think you're going to see, though, is really focusing on the primaries. So for my own list building, it's very much on that. Like, how can I ensure that I'm holding more for 3 straight turns? Because if I hold for 3 straight turns, I've essentially won. We might have a wash in the secondaries. Maybe you might score a little bit more than me. But the biggest swings in terms of point differential will be if you can maintain that hold. So again, it comes down to resiliency for me, and making sure that you can't move my army fast enough. Like, you table me on turn 5, okay, great, good for you. But if I held for the previous 3 turns, it's a Pyrrhic victory. You still lost.
I feel like you're going to see a lot of that, Dustin. A lot of early holding 3, and yeah, you may be tabled by round 5, but you have an insurmountable lead. I just have a feeling that's how a lot of these games are going to start, at least early in 9th edition.
And honestly, that's my biggest critique with 9th edition as I see it right now. Is I found that 5th turn to be a little unsatisfactory, especially in the bottom of 5, because the game is already set at that point. It's pretty much done by 4, and having a game go from 6 really close turns in 8th edition to only really, let's be honest, it's really 4 turns. Kind of it's a little frustrating.
I would caution, though, I do think early on playing these missions, I think you can overextend too fast too soon, and that might be partly why some of these games are ending so soon. I know like I was mentioning this earlier in the podcast, but learning to play the Adepticon missions, that's one thing I was finding is, yes, you might be tempted to go hold that 3 very early, but the way the objectives are, like, you are going to get punished for it, and you have to be very careful in how you set those up.
I was going to say, I guess what we're used to in ITC is, let's say someone who goes first reaches out for that and hold more, and then the defender, has the opportunity to shoot them off that point. Now we're kind of going to see the opposite way, in the sense that your player 1, they reach out for a point, they get onto it. Player 2 can't really react to that, so they'll reach out and do something to try and hold more or hold the same. So player 1 that goes first doesn't get those points, and then in turn 2, the person going first actually has a bit of an advantage there, because they go, okay, I'm going to target this so you can't score it in your turn. So the dynamic first and second turn has really been put on its head because of the starter turn scoring, and I actually think power for going first now compared to in ITC, massive amount of power, because you also into the game. You dictate what the defender or the second player gets in their turn 5. That's a huge amount of power that you have.
I've experienced the same so far, Dineeth.
Is there anything? Well, I was just going to ask: is there anything you can design into your list to help defend against that scenario?
I think Brian, well, you picked up that point earlier, where you have a transport with those layers of durability built in. Like you have a big transport, and the transport dies, unit and a character gets out, then you got to kill the unit, then you got to kill a character. So stuff like that is really handy. Those stratagems that some armies have that allow you to resurrect things, really handy. So there are ways,
especially end of phase.
Oh yeah, that's it.
And that's exactly the 2 main lists that I've been building. So the Coven Quins list I've been building revolves around that like 10 9-man unit of racks, which at T5 are very hard to shift, but they can get onto an objective 12 inches away and then be resurrected again. So you can almost recycle that. So that's one of the things that we were talking about, right? And then the layering of transports, troops, and characters. But I think the one thing that you mentioned, Brian, which is interesting, is you're absolutely right. I've so far experienced that the person who goes first has a slight advantage. However, if you can get if you're going second and that person who goes first overextends, if you go second and you're willing to be conservative for 1 turn, you can get a slight advantage on taking out, killing enough of your opponent's units so that they're they're more demure later in the game. So like then you're really going for that big turn 4, big turn 5. And that's what I've seen so far. And how do you do that? I found that indirect fire is actually still very important. For me, it's like Night Spinners, it's you know, I'm experimenting with Decan and Wraith Seers. I'm experimenting, well, not experimenting, but using Astral Aim on my Grey Knights. And I still think those are very powerful abilities.
Just sold 5 Basilisks and 3 Wyverns. And
I think for me, the approach is accomplishing very similar things through different functionality, essentially. So me, I kind of think of my army in being sort of like 3 main parts of the army. I call one of my Vanguard objective holders, which sort of start on points or get on points very early and sort of force the initiative onto my opponent. I have sort of a quick reactionary force, which I can use to reinforce and counter the opponent's movements. And then I sort of have my third main assault block, which is designed to basically, I'm going to go and take your points and force you to react to what I'm doing. So for me, the Vanguard force, playing a replayer, right, does a lot of Vanguard Marines. So Incursors, Infiltrators, and pairing him with something like an Invictor is actually kind of an interesting prospect and something I want to test out a lot more. You know, that's something that can sit on points and force you to start coming to me and start reacting. I plan on using things like Thunderwolf Cavalry and the new Outriders as sort of that quick reactionary force or like units in impulsors, because based on how you move, I can then start countering and start reinforcing the points that I need to. Meanwhile, I have my main block of Wolfen or a Repulsor with some Assault Intercessors, things like that that are going to your end of the board to basically hammer your main lines and stop you from being able to counter my game plan.
You were even mentioning, Blade Guard vets fit that role really well as that like first or second wave.
Oh, yeah, because one, I really like them. I don't think they can fit a main assault because they're capped at 3. But for 105 points and a 2+ save with a 4+ invuln, your opponent has to dedicate a lot to shifting 9 wounds of that. And they can melt anything that they really touch with stratagem support and things like that. So they're perfect to basically sally onto the point. You know, the Cursors can kind of hold things for the first turn or 2, but then mid-game, the Blade Guard vets are getting onto those points and just saying, well, now you have to deal with these sort of cheap, efficient units. And again, it's sort of forcing out the economy of action and making your opponent waste a lot of their actions to remove you from points or try and take points from you.
And if I can kind of bring back the game that we played, Brian, in the Northern Force event, that economy of action and having to force someone to flush a unit out is huge, especially when the units that you have don't really mean much because you've got second or third waves lined up. Yeah, that's massive. Like I did the same thing with my Death Company to try and push into the board, and I was like, wait, that's my one hammer unit gone, and then it was just free reign for everything else.
So I think it'll be very interesting on trying to weigh the decision of, well, when can I sacrifice this unit to hold a point, or when can I leave it on, what trades can I effectively make? Like, how much is that pawn in the game actually worth? And one thing, Brian, I've talked about before is this idea of sort of, VP per 100. We released an article way back, last year kind of on the topic. And it's something I kind of want to bring up again for the new system, because in my mind, there's 100 total victory points up for grabs. Now, as you already sort of mentioned, Dineeth, it's probably impossible of scoring all 100. But I think you can think of the game as either, a unit helps me win the game by either 1, scoring victory points, or 2, denying victory points. And both are equally effective in winning you the game. And I think ultimately you can win a game by a total combination of gaining and denying VP. I think if you can gain 50 VP and deny 50 VP, you're in a very strong position to win. And I think if your VP gained and VP denied sum up to 100, you're a front runner and have a high chance to win. I think that's what you're ultimately trying to do. So if you try and break down a list, essentially you're looking at every 100 points in your army should be getting you about 5 VP or denying you 5 VP.
And I think the first way I'm going to do that is by just taking all the paint off my opponent's army to deny them 10 VP. That'll probably be the first thing. We're trying to. I know way back when we met, Brian, we're talking about 40k sabermetrics, and that's exactly right. And I think that 9th edition, we're going to see a lot more of that. In 8th, one of my most valuable units every single game was that large rack squad. Every game, they held objectives. They were the ones that ended up giving me more points, like quote unquote. Their VP per 100 was just skyrocketing compared to like even the Talos unit. So as we evaluate these units, I have a feeling in 9th edition, units that we may not have thought were as important in 8th are going to see significantly more play in 9th edition due to the way that the missions play, due to the way that the edition starts to shape out and how the meta shakes out.
It's very interesting for decisions like, do I send these 5 intercessors to steal this point to deny the opponent hold more? And if you look at it that way, you're like, well, they're 100 points. If they're denying 5 VP, boom, they made back their costs, and I should make that play. So I think that'll be something interesting to track. I'd be very curious to see what the average scores for tournaments are moving forward, because I know we based that initial article off the ITC Stats Center. It actually provided us with a ton of ITC data, and we saw, the average really was about 25 points per side. And so we based the VP there off of that. So I'd want to do something very similar for the 9th edition games. But I think right now, if you can score 50 and deny 50, you're in a very strong spot to win.
Yeah. I agree. GW, if you're listening, we're good with big data. So if you want to send your app data over to us, we're happy to digest that and analyze it for you.
Even the data for the next codex, man. If you guys want to send that watch codex over, I'll have a look at it. It'll be great.
Yeah. Now you just play so many armies, you might as well just send them all to you.
I'll tell you what, man. This start of 9th edition, I've played probably about 7 or 8 different things.
No.
Well, one reason I wanted you on is because you have been trying so many different things. Like what? Do you have any big takeaways from trying out all these different armies?
Yeah, I guess on that point, so I started playing properly competitively right at the end of 7th, which was, an absolute...
Let's call it a shit show.
Hey, let's call it a shit show. So at the end of 7th and moving into 8th, I was lucky in the sense that my knowledge of the game wasn't huge. My experience was 6 months of play. So I had a fairly clean slate already, and that made it pretty easy for me to dive into something, just absorb the new rule set and get into it. A few of the local players in our area that were good, that were, had played on DC teams and stuff before, that had played for state teams, some of them really excelled and others didn't do well. And the ones that excelled were able to really start over with a clean slate, figure out what was strong, not have any of those previous attachments from 7th, and pick something and just perform with it. So I've kind of taken that mindset as well. I was pretty heavily invested in 8th edition, especially with Deathwatch. I played them on and off for essentially 18 months, taking breaks and going into other factions, but essentially 18 months of Deathwatch. And I've really had to, take a step back, put them on the shelf, and just, trial different things and see what is strong, see what is good. So I've played, started with Deathwatch, realized that they were all right, but they couldn't play the same way, so I put them aside. Tried some Dark Angels Terminators, that was pretty cool. Tried some Talon Masters, tried a list of Guard and Tempestus Scions, which I really liked. I'm happy to pocket that going forward. Now I'm going to try some Custodes, tried some Nids before we had a rule of 3 confirmation. Now we do, so, I can't really run 30 Hive Guard, fortunately. So I've just been mixing and matching anything and everything that I want to get my hands on and consider playing. And I think that for me, every time I've changed army, I've learned something different, something new. And I've also learned about the weaknesses of that faction, to play against it without sidetracking too much. I always struggled playing against Tau. And one day I just proxied a Triptide Tau list and played it against someone. And since that day, that just blew my mind. I was like, wow, this army really has limitations. It's not unkillable by any stretch of the word. And it can be beaten. And since then, I've had so much more success against that faction. So I think there is never any loss to trying new things. Straight. And this is the best time to do it. There's not going to be a tournament in at least a couple of months. The best time to mix and match. And what am I going to play in 9th? I have no freaking idea. I'm just trying new stuff.
Yeah, it's very awesome to hear.
Yeah, and I mean, if a lot of people, either now or as 9th comes out, that have been really enjoying and invested in 8th, you'll probably come to that crossroad where you're sure on what to play, and you're not sure if the faction that you're playing at the moment is going to be strong. And sometimes just taking a step back and looking at something else, or looking at a different way to play what you have, that's never a bad idea. What's the worst thing that can happen? You find out it doesn't work and move on.
I feel attacked right now, Dineeth.
I'm just trying to get Brian to paint his Space Wolves white.
I'm still trying to get Brian to play Harleys, so
yeah.
that needs to be his main by the end of the year.
Well, as we were talking before the show, it's like as soon as GW stops releasing Primaris Marines, I'll I'll get those Void Weavers I need for my Harley army. Experimentation is one of the best things you can do. And, that's something that Dustin harps on sort of all the time. Even in chat and Discord that I saw, Dustin, you posted convert and paint up stick bombers, or was it tank busters?
It's tank busters, yeah.
No joke, man.
What has you so pumped up about tank busters?
It all comes back to the idea of the center of the board being the big battle zone, which is quite different from the dynamics of 8th, where I wanted to shoot you from all the way across the board. If I'm fighting within that close range, tank busters are fantastic because they're fairly short range guns with the main rocket launcher, but they have an incredible weapon if you get within 8 inches that could mathematically kill a knight in one go. And then with new dynamics of transports becoming more popular, it's a great chassis to kind of push tank busters around the field. I think that's a unit I definitely want to be testing out for a little while.
You got anything else cooking in the big mech shop, or any other ideas for directions for your orcs?
Yeah, it's tough. I think a lot of people are going to go back to the mech book with the Sag Dead. That's huge. That was the predominant method of shooting. And with the close range of 9th edition, concentrated mech guns, which was my big firing base, is definitely a lot more doubt. I'm pretty high on Killicans right now because they have a multi-role. And I think multi-role units, like you see with Dreadnoughts, are going to come to prominence because cans can shoot really well, and if you play them right, they can also hit really, really well. But with orcs, you really got to lean in pretty hard. So there's still a lot of testing that's to go around. I've got 3 lists I've kind of got thumping about. One is graph based, one is more vehicle based, and the other one is kind of your classic boys coming in from Deep Strike in various ways.
From our test game, Dustin, I can confirm that Killicans hit hard.
Now imagine if there was 12 more of them.
Good God, no.
That's the thrill of 9th, though, right? Like getting to test things that are completely new. Like I have units that have been sitting on the shelf for over a year that I would love to play. I bought a gorgeous collection of metal commandos that haven't been used ever, and I think I'm going to find a use for them in a test game coming up soon.
All right, well, I think that's a good segment to end on. What's the next thing everyone is interested in testing? I'll put it, the man of 100 armies. I'll send it to you first, Dineeth.
So I'm about to, in Australia now, what time is it? It's 2:35 on a Sunday. So I'm about to, after we finish recording this, I'm about to go over to a mate's place and play a Custodes army. And probably at about 5:35, I'll figure out this is bad. But, it's what I'm going to test. I really want to move into playing an army that can just move the entire force centrally and just threaten, that whole opponent's deployment zone. So a Custodes patrol, I believe it is. So nothing too exciting. It's got the man, the myth, the legend, Trahan Valoris. It's got a shield captain on bike, likely with a commander trait. Not sure what it is at this stage. A single unit of 7 custodian guards, 3 with shields, 4 with the spears. An 8 Alaris Terminator unit, all with axes, a Terminator Praetor Vexilla for the Homer, a unit of 3 bikes just to dart around and do bike things, and a Telemon to try out the new Custodes rules on it and try and run it into combat. So very take all comers, very similar to what Darren, who was on the show last episode for you guys, was talking about. But yeah, I'm just going to give that a good stress test against my mate Liam Hackett's Death Guard.
Very nice. What shield toss are you running in?
I'm going to start as the Dread Host, just because of the obvious power with exploding 6s and things like that. I kind of want to try the Neg 1 strength, reactive one, but so yeah, starting as Dread Host. But I might look at trimming down a bit and getting an assassin in there, because I think that'll be a good amount of tech for a Custodes army to have.
At the classes.
I'm not sure about the Kilexis. What do you guys think about? I'm probably derailing this, but I'm not convinced that you'll see as many smart capsules around.
I've been saying this nonstop to Brian, because I think you need to look at Inquisitors. I think there's really something there for Custodian players.
Oh yeah, true.
Especially the Ordo Xenos one, which has the ability to shroud itself. I think that's going to be a really nice piece of tech.
That's really cool.
Yeah, definitely some tech to consider.
How about you, Brian? What are you working on right now, Brian?
Well, I've been hyping up those Blade Guard veterans ever since I saw them. So I'm pumped to use them.
Everyone's on that train. Yeah.
I am glad that in practice they seem to be very, very good. So right now the the riddle I'm trying to solve is how to best deliver them. So I've tried a couple methods. Well, I'm calling it the party bus, where I'm dusting off my repulsors, and I tried putting 3 squads in there with the hero. I think it's a little too many eggs in one basket, and you really want them to spread out around the board. So I've also tried 5 assault intercessors, 3 blade guard veterans, and 2 heroes in there as well, and kind of moving them around. So I think next on the docket is I want to try, just go back to my good old impulsors, try and throw them in there and try and see. But my list sort of fits that archetype I was describing before, where I sort of have these vanguard objective holders, where I have 2 squads of incursives and an invictor. I have a QRF, the quick reactionary force, so basically impulsor with 2 blade guard vets, a squad of outriders, and then I'm kind of banking on this wolf priest on bike being released here pretty soon. If not, I can revert back to a jump pack there, but they're designed to basically reinforce those incursors where it's sort of needed. And then following up with the main assault is I basically have a repulsor full of some assault intercessors, Ragnar, a Judiciaire, and basically a squad of blade guard veterans to kind of tie things off and finish it off. So I really want to try out repulsors, kind of give them a go, because again, I'm trying to work a little bit more of that shooting in there. I'll see if they're sort of worth the points, but if not, I might just sort of dial it back and go more to Thunderwolf Cavalry are really expensive now, but they're still incredible at holding that midfield, so I'll have to experiment a little bit more with them as well. And Brian fears my Wolfens, so I'm gonna have to experiment with them with the new point cost too as well.
What I like about your approach is this is the same thing I say to everyone who says, "Hey, Dustin, check out this orc list." I say, "Okay, how are you delivering your units?" Number one, because that question has to be considered from the very start of list building, and it seems like that's your number one question when you're examining your Space Wolves.
Oh yeah, it has to be for how slow my guys are. We can't advance and charge very easily and stuff like that. So I think that'll be key, because I think a lot of it is, for me, the big thing, combat has shifted to be, I would go and set up these big hammer turns where I can just charge a lot of your things, fight twice with the wolf, and then just kill everything. To now you're seeing a lot of these little nebulous combats pop up around the map. So you can't just go all MSU, because I think you still need some of the stratagem efficiency of having a big unit to really hammer something hard. Sure. But you need to also spread out enough. So finding what the right mix is, I guess, is also kind of what I'm looking at. What lists are you working on, Brian, from an Aeldari standpoint? I know you mentioned you've been struggling with a few ideas.
Yeah, so right now I'm tinkering with the idea of the expert crafters, hunter of ancient relics. So basically it's 2 patrols. One has the Avatar of Cain, which I think is going to be a big player.
What?
Yeah, heard it here first.
I love the immediate laughter.
I'm telling you, I think it's got some play, especially with the board sort of compacting and meeting in the middle. That dude can slap, and if I'm not mistaken, he still benefits from craft world traits. Is that correct?
From my understanding, yes, he does.
He can't benefit from a relic. So again, getting him with expert crafters and hunter of ancient relics gives him 6 attacks, re-rolling. Seer of shifting vectors gives him that re-roll for save or hit or wound. So you're looking at 6 quality attacks, right? And so he's leading a patrol with a Wraithseer with a D cannon, 6 Wraithblades with Ghost Axe, Dire Avengers, and then 2 Wave Serpents in that patrol. And then the other patrol, it's a Farseer, Wraithseer, squad of 3 Hornets, which these are quickly becoming one of my absolute favorite units. I played them a lot towards the end of 8th edition. The ability to forewarn them, to be able to do damage when things come in from Deep Strike, is just incredible. And they're great targets for guide. They can do quite a bit of damage. They're fast. They can be very durable with fortune, so they can go out and get objectives. So I'm really a fan of that. And then a Night Spinner, another Wave Serpent. This one is Experts, Masters of Concealment. So I think it has all the right notes. Just got to get on the table to test it now.
Yeah, I think those Hornets really are a hidden gem. I mean, we've been saying that all through the end of 8th, really. I just don't understand why more people weren't taking them.
They have that Hornet Pulse Laser, which basically each one gets 6 attacks, strength 6, AP -3, flat 2 damage. And now without the penalty to hit, they're hidden on 3s. So you're looking at 18 shots for the squad, toughness 6, 8 wounds, 3+ save, 2 with masters. And they can get out -1 hit as well if they advance.
Yeah, and now with Crystal Targeting Matrix, they can advance and basically still shoot. at a -1, but you have options to protect him now instead of just having to forgo shooting all entirely.
That's right. So really high on those guys. Yeah, that's the Eldari list. And then just quickly touch on the Custode. My Custodes list is very similar to Dineeth's, except I'm playing Shadow Keepers. I'm so over the moon about that. The ability to reduce strength of incoming attacks by 1 is so key on a lot of these units. The only difference between my list and your list really is right now I have 5 Virtus Praetors and only 6 Alaris Custodians, because I still really like the ability to clear screens, and that's where the bikes come into play there. But yeah, I think you're going to love Custodes. Let me know how it goes for you, Dineeth.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, that balance between like the combat brick and screen clearing ability is definitely something that I have to figure out.
All right, Dustin, last chance. Anything else you want to add about your orcs?
People want to hear about your orcs, Dustin. Tell us, what's the war boss cooking?
How shiny or how rusty are those choppers going to be?
Oh man, don't tell my wife how many buggies I gotta buy. That's the big one. The scrap jets and the shock dome dragster, those are really big picks. Some sort of mono death skull list is definitely in the works, but just acquiring the models at this point is really challenging because those models weren't great 2-3 months ago. That'll be work in progress. Something more immediate that I'm gonna test out because I do have the models for it will be perhaps a blood axes or perhaps a death skulls. I haven't quite decided just yet. Mostly commando list. The idea is coming in from deep strike, but for free with a lot of units. That way, points you get swarmed and could hold them for at least that 2 to 3 turn period, like we talked about earlier. And then I'm also doing some research into making the Grot Mob work. There's a ton of really, really high quality shooting that can be found in the Grot Mob list with some Forge World units as well as some existing Codex units. But there is surprisingly also a lot of melee potential in that list, which I don't think anyone would have believed me until Saga of the Beasthead. But that's the fun part of Dineeth, right? There is so many fun options in the 3 or 4 lists that I have cooking. They're all fundamentally different, and that is super, super cool.
Endos, huh? Let's party.
So, fresh off your...
somebody gets that reference.
Spoiler alert, but fresh off your victory against the Custodes, do you think Gaz is going to be making its way into any of your competitive lists?
For Dineeth, I would say no. In Dineeth, he would feature in some, but not all. About half the list that I'm looking at, he would have a place. He's still very expensive, but his points proportionally did not go up that badly. And his buffs are fantastic. And the big thing is the resiliency. We talked about that already today. To be able to sit on a point and not leave it guaranteed, because he can only take so many wounds per phase, is really, really enormous. And it makes that point value very much worth it. But, I think mono death skull lists are going to be really, really popular, as they should be, because they have OBSEC on all of their infantry. And it's kind of tough to fit them in there, especially if you're running a lot of bikes. We'll have to see. Like I said, there's still a lot of experimentation that has to happen before the orc meta shakes out, especially with the SAG, the relic SAG being deleted from our options.
Thanks again, Dineeth, for joining us. And if you guys haven't yet, definitely check out the Normal Blokes Podcast. Highly recommend giving it a listen. If you like the stuff we're putting out, they've been doing it basically for longer.
What's it? We're up to about episode 60 now, so we've been doing it for a couple of years. Yes, kind of vibe. We've got Luke, our host, who does a lot of the stats breakdowns for us. We've got Liam Hackett, who's part of the Australian C team, current Queen captain on our show as well, so he's always good to have him. But yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. It was a pleasure.
Likewise.
Thanks, Dineeth.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to get you guys back on again at some point, and I think there has to be a Normal Bloke versus GDFC tournament at some point.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to tee up a tabletop simulator league.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it.
Charter remote. We'll play on that.
I mean, yeah, we could go to international waters and play if you guys.
There we go.
Realistically, Brian will probably fly all of you over here before he gets on TTS.
All right, that's not a bad idea. You let me know. I got 10 years of consulting airline miles to use.
Yeah, we'll see.
My airline miles.
Ooh, a Hawaii showdown is what I want to see.
Yeah, hey, my hometown. I'd be happy for that. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. This has been episode 6. what are you guys going to be trying out for 9th edition? We'd love for you guys to get involved with the conversation, so you can always email grimdarkfilthycasuals@gmail.com if you want to join our Discord. You can find us on all the usual media outlet channels. We'll see you all out there on the battlefield.